There are moments in a life, small, seemingly insignificant fissures in the bedrock of a shared existence, that only reveal their catastrophic potential in retrospect. My life with David was built on what I had believed to be solid ground, a 10-year marriage that was a quiet, respectable edifice of mutual affection and shared history. But the truth is, the ground had been shifting beneath our feet for years, and the words that finally brought the whole structure crashing down were not a sudden, violent earthquake, but a quiet, almost careless whisper. Maybe I should have married your brother instead. I didn't mean it. Not really. It was a stupid, cruel, and thoughtless thing to say. A verbal grenade lobbed across the dinner table in the heat of a mundane, pointless argument. I had been feeling what? Unseen. Unheard. A piece of furniture in the meticulously curated museum of David's life. He was sitting across from me, his face a mask of placid, infuriating calm, chewing his food with a slow, deliberate rhythm as I detailed my latest list of grievances. His detachment was a wall, and my words were a desperate, clumsy attempt to breach it. The silence that followed my pronouncement was not empty. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the light, all the history, out of the room. David did not yell. He did not slam his fist on the table. He did not even look at me with anger. He simply placed his fork down, with a quiet, definitive click, leaned back in his chair, and he smirked. It was not a smile. It was a cold, knowing, and utterly terrifying expression, a baring of teeth that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. "Sign the divorce papers," he said, his voice a low, measured, and unfamiliar instrument. "They're on your pillow. This house is no longer yours." I blinked, the words a foreign language my brain refused to process. A joke. It had to be a joke. A dark, twisted, but ultimately harmless piece of theater. But the look in his eyes, the cold, flat, dead certainty, told me this was no performance. He stood, his movements fluid and unhurried, and he left the room, his footsteps on the stairs a steady, funereal beat. I sat there, a statue in the ruins of my own making, my mind a chaotic scramble to understand. This was not our pattern. Our pattern was the argument, the tears, mine, the grudging, awkward apology, his, and the slow, resentful return to a fragile, temporary peace. This was an execution. I replayed the scene, the argument, the years leading up to it, searching for a clue, a sign, a breadcrumb that might have led me to this precipice. Our marriage, once a partnership, had devolved into a kind of business arrangement. He was the CEO, the driven, ambitious, and emotionally absent leader. I was what? A department head? A senior manager of domestic affairs? He had become obsessed with his work, his plans, his damn spreadsheets, and I had become a ghost in our own home. And then there was Alex, David's brother. My brother-in-law, the specter at the feast. I hadn't meant what I'd said, not in any real, tangible way. But the truth, the ugly, inconvenient, and now catastrophic truth, was that Alex was everything David was not. He was warm. He was charming. He was a man who listened with an intensity that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He made me feel seen. And that, I was beginning to understand, was a dangerous, intoxicating drug for a woman who felt invisible. To bring his name into our argument had been a profound, unforgivable betrayal. A low blow. A tactical error of catastrophic proportions. But divorce? Was he really willing to detonate our entire world over one stupid, thoughtless sentence? My legs, feeling like they belonged to a stranger, carried me up the stairs. My heart was a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. And there they were, on my pillow, a crisp, white, and brutally official stack of papers. This was not a bluff. This was a checkmate. I sank onto the bed, the papers a cold, dead weight in my trembling hands. The words swam before my eyes, a sterile, legal lexicon that reduced our 10 years of shared life to a series of clauses and subclauses. Irreconcilable differences. The phrase was a cruel, clinical joke. We were not a statistic. We were a story. A love story. Weren't we? Tears, hot and useless, blurred my vision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound on his office door and beg him to talk to me, to fix this. But a deeper, colder part of me knew that this was not about last night. This was about years. Years of quiet, corrosive resentments. Years of things left unsaid. Years of a slow, almost imperceptible drift that had, last night, finally carried us over the edge of a waterfall. I sat there, clutching the instruments of my own destruction, as the sun went down and the room filled with a deep, suffocating darkness. I did not know what to do. I did not know who I was without him. But I knew, with a certainty that was as profound and as terrifying as the silence in the house, that nothing would ever be the same again. The night was a long, sleepless vigil. I sat in the dark, the divorce papers a sacred, terrible relic in my hands, and I became an archaeologist of my own failed marriage, sifting through the layers of memory, searching for the moment the rot had set in. The woman who had stormed upstairs in a blaze of righteous indignation was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out, terrified stranger. The David I had fallen in love with was a man of quiet, steady strength. He was not a poet, not a dreamer, but he was a rock. He made me feel safe, anchored in a world that had always felt a little too chaotic. His ambition, in those early days, had been a quality I admired, a shared engine driving us towards a bright, prosperous future. But ambition is a hungry beast, and over the years, it had consumed him. He had stopped being my partner and had become the sole proprietor of our life, a man who managed our family with the same cool, detached efficiency with which he managed his investment portfolio. The resentment had been a slow, creeping vine, so gradual in its growth that I had not noticed it until it was choking the life out of everything. The late nights at the office, the weekends spent hunched over his laptop, the way his phone had become a third, more important, partner in our marriage. I had tried to talk to him, to breach the wall of his distraction, but my words had been met with a patient, infuriating condescension. "I'm doing this for us, Emma," he would say, his eyes never leaving the screen. But it had stopped feeling like us a long time ago. It felt like his life, and I was just a supporting character. And then there was Alex. I hated the space he occupied in my mind, the way his name had become a symbol of everything that was missing in my marriage. He was not just David's brother, he was David's opposite. He was the sun to David's moon, the fire to his ice. He was warm and funny, and when he looked at you, you felt like you were the only person in the world. I had never crossed a line with him. I had never even allowed myself to consciously entertain the thought. But in the quiet, lonely corners of my heart, I had made the comparison. And last night, in a moment of reckless, self-destructive honesty, I had given that comparison a voice. The sound of David moving in the kitchen below was a jarring intrusion into my morbid reverie. The sheer, unadulterated normalcy of it, the clink of a coffee mug, the whir of the grinder, was a profound, almost violent, insult. How could he be so calm? How could he proceed with the mundane rituals of a Tuesday morning when our entire world was on fire? I grabbed the papers, a new wave of desperate, frantic anger washing over me, and I marched downstairs, a soldier going into a battle she had already lost. "What is this?" I demanded, slamming the papers on the table between us. He looked up from his coffee, his face a mask of placid, infuriating composure. "Exactly what it looks like," he said. "Don't give me that," I snapped. "You had these ready. You were just waiting for me to make one mistake so you could pull the trigger." His calmness was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. "I didn't blindside you, Emma," he said, his voice a low, steady instrument of reason. "This didn't come out of nowhere. You know that. This is about what I said last night." I insisted, my voice trembling. "It was a joke, David. A stupid, thoughtless, terrible joke. I didn't mean it." His gaze hardened. "Maybe you didn't mean to say it out loud," he said. "But you said it. And it wasn't just a joke, Emma. It was a window. A window into everything you've been thinking, everything you've been feeling, but haven't had the courage to admit." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died in my throat. He was not entirely wrong, and that truth was a fresh, sharp stab to the heart. "I can't believe you're giving up," I said, my voice breaking. "After everything. You're just done." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "I'm not giving up, Emma. I gave up years ago. I've been fighting a holding action, trying to maintain the illusion of a partnership. But I can't be the only one fighting. And last night, you made it very clear that you were no longer on my side." I stared at him, my mind reeling. Was he right? Had I stopped fighting? Or had I just been waiting for him to notice that I was drowning? "I don't want this," I whispered, my hands gripping the edge of the table, a flimsy, useless anchor in the storm. "That's up to you," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "But I will not continue to live in a marriage that is a lie." With that, he stood, rinsed his coffee mug in the sink, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the cold, hard, and undeniable instruments of our end. And for the first time, I was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that this was not a negotiation. It was a verdict, and I had already been found guilty. The legal papers were not a proposal. They were a declaration of war, and I had arrived on the battlefield unarmed and utterly unprepared. The sheer, cold-blooded precision of the document was a testament to the fact that this was not a rash, emotional decision on David's part. This was a meticulously planned strategic maneuver. He had been preparing for this, perhaps for months, perhaps for years. The thought was a chilling one. While I had been living in a state of quiet, simmering discontent, he had been building an arsenal. I stormed back downstairs, the papers clutched in my hand like a weapon I didn't know how to wield. He was still at the table, a portrait of infuriating calm, scrolling through something on his phone. "What the hell is this, David?" I demanded again, my voice a raw, ragged thing. He looked up, his expression one of almost bored patience. "I believe we've already established what it is, Emma. You've been planning this," I accused, my voice rising. "You've been sitting on these papers, just waiting for the perfect excuse." He leaned back, his arms crossed over his chest, a gesture of cool, detached authority. "Let's not be dramatic, Emma. This isn't about last night. This is about the last 5 years. Last night was simply the catalyst. One stupid comment," I insisted, my voice cracking. "You're throwing away our entire life over one stupid comment." "It wasn't just a comment," he said, his tone maddeningly even. "It was a symptom of a disease that has been killing this marriage for a very long time. Your resentment, your constant, subtle comparisons, the way you've been emotionally checked out for years." "I've been checked out." I shot back, my own anger flaring. "You're never here, David. You live in your office, in your spreadsheets. You're a ghost in your own home. And you have the audacity to accuse me of being checked out." His expression softened, a flicker of something that might have been sadness in his eyes. "I was waiting for a reason to stay, Emma," he said, his voice quieter now. "I was waiting for a sign that you were still in this with me. And last night you handed me a sign that said, 'Exit here.'" The words knocked the wind out of me. They were so calm, so rational, and so utterly, devastatingly, final. Tears, hot and shameful, began to well in my eyes, but I blinked them back with a fierce, prideful effort. I would not give him the satisfaction of my tears. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You're just done?" "That's up to you," he said, gesturing to the papers. "You can contest this. We can drag this through the courts, make it ugly for everyone. Or, you can be honest with yourself, for once, and admit that this marriage has been a hollowed-out shell for a very long time." I stared at him, at this stranger who was my husband, and I saw a man made of pure, unyielding granite. There was no warmth, no empathy, no flicker of the love that had once been the foundation of our life. There was only a cold, hard, and unshakable resolve. I snatched the papers from the table and stormed out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind me. I sank onto the bed, the papers a leaden weight in my lap. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear them to shreds. But what good would it do? He was right. In a terrible, fundamental way, he was right. Our marriage had been dying a slow, quiet death for years. And last night, I had been the one to sign the death certificate. I thought about calling someone. My mother, who had never approved of David's cold, ambitious nature. My friends, who would offer a chorus of sympathetic but ultimately useless advice. But who could I tell the whole, ugly truth to? Who could I admit that I had, in a moment of reckless cruelty, invoked the name of another man, his own brother, as a weapon against my husband? And then, a name, a voice, an idea, surfaced from the chaotic depths of my despair. Alex, the very man who was the unwitting, or perhaps not so unwitting, catalyst for this entire catastrophe. It was a terrible, reckless, and probably self-destructive idea. But in that moment, he was the only person in the world who felt like he might, just might, understand. The decision to call Alex was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. It was like reaching for a bottle of whiskey in the middle of a house fire. A momentary, numbing relief that would likely only make the eventual inferno worse. But I was past the point of rational calculation. I was drowning, and he was the only available lifeline. Emma. His voice on the other end of the line was a warm, familiar current in the cold, dead ocean of my morning. What's wrong? You sound terrible. The words, a simple, unvarnished expression of concern, were enough to break me. The dam of my carefully constructed composure burst, and the story came out in a torrent of sobs and half-formed sentences. David, divorce papers, he's kicking me out. I'm coming over, he said, his voice a calm, steady command in the chaos. An hour later, he was in my living room, his presence a strange, unsettling mixture of comfort and complication. He was the eye of the storm, the very subject of the argument that had detonated my marriage, and yet, he was also the only person who felt like an ally. He sat beside me on the sofa, his expression a mixture of concern and a quiet, simmering anger that was directed, I knew, at his brother. He picked up the divorce papers from the coffee table, his brow furrowed as he scanned the cold, legalistic prose. This is insane, he muttered. He's been planning this. That's what I said. I cried, wiping at a fresh wave of tears. He was just waiting for me to make one mistake. What happened, Emma? He asked gently. What was the mistake? I hesitated, the shame of my own words a hot, bitter taste in my mouth. I couldn't meet his eyes. We were arguing, I whispered, and I said something stupid. Something unforgivable. What did you say? He pressed, his voice still gentle, but with an undercurrent of insistence. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I said maybe I should have married you instead. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with the weight of my confession. I risked a glance at him. He was not shocked. He was not angry. He simply sighed, a long, weary sound, and ran a hand through his hair. Oh, Emma, he said, his voice filled with a complex, unreadable emotion. I didn't mean it. I insisted, the words a desperate, pathetic mantra. It was a joke. A terrible, stupid joke. He looked at me then, his gaze direct and unwavering. Was it? He asked. The question hung in the air between us, a stark, uncomfortable truth. Was it just a joke? Or was it a Freudian slip, a momentary, reckless expression of a deeper, more complicated reality? He leaned back, his expression unreadable. Do you love him, Emma? The question, the same one I had been unable to answer for myself, was a brutal, direct hit. I don't know. I whispered, the admission of fresh, new betrayal. He nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed something he had long suspected. Look, he said, his voice soft again. I don't want to be in the middle of this. But I am. And I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm here for you. If you need a place to stay, if you need someone to talk to, anything. David would lose his mind if I stayed with you. I said, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping my lips. A small, sad smile touched his own lips. I think David has already lost his mind, Emma. He left soon after, leaving me with a sense of comfort that was deeply, profoundly, unsettling. He had offered me a sanctuary, a safe harbor. But I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the divorce papers on my coffee table, that seeking refuge with him would be like trying to put out a fire with a can of gasoline. His presence in my life, however well-intentioned, was not a solution. It was a complication. And I was beginning to suspect that it was a complication both he and his brother had been cultivating for a very long time. The silence that followed Alex's departure was a different kind of silence. It was not the cold, empty silence of David's absence, but a tense, charged silence, thick with the residue of Alex's unsettling presence. I expected a confrontation. I expected David to emerge from his office, his face a mask of cold fury, and demand to know why I had brought his brother, the ghost at our feast, into the heart of our domestic war. But he didn't. The house remained quiet, and his silence was, in its own way, more unnerving than any outburst would have been. I finally found him in his office later that evening, a fortress of solitude from which he had been ruling his silent, emotional kingdom. He was at his desk, the glow of his laptop casting his face in a cold, artificial light. He did not look up when I entered. We need to talk, I said, my voice a shaky, but determined thing. Do we? He replied, his fingers never ceasing their rhythmic dance across the keyboard. His coldness was a physical blow, But I would not be deterred. Yes, we do. You can't just ignore me. You can't just pretend I don't exist while you systematically dismantle our entire life. He finally looked at me, his eyes as cold and hard as polished stone. I'm not pretending you don't exist, Emma. I'm simply proceeding. You've had your say. For years. Now it's my turn. Your turn to what? I demanded. To punish me? To make me pay for one mistake. This is not about one mistake, he said, his voice a low, dangerous monotone. This is about a pattern. A history. Do you think I'm blind, Emma? Do you think I haven't seen the way you look at him? The way your face lights up when he walks into a room? The way you hang on his every word as if he's some kind of prophet, and I'm just the background noise. That's not fair. I cried, shaking my head. I have never. Don't lie to me, he cut in, his voice sharp as a razor. And more importantly, don't lie to yourself. You may not have crossed a physical line, Emma, but you have been having an emotional affair with my brother for years. You've been comparing me to him, weighing me against him, and finding me wanting. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you haven't. His words were a brutal, public dissection of a truth I had not even been willing to admit to myself. Had I been comparing them? Had I been holding David up to the impossible, romanticized standard of his charming, carefree brother? Is that what this is about? I whispered, my knees feeling weak. Is this about Alex? He let out a short, bitter, humorless laugh. This is about you, Emma. It's about your profound and apparently incurable dissatisfaction. I have spent 10 years of my life trying to be the man you wanted me to be. The steady, reliable, successful man. But it was never enough. Because I am not him. And I am done trying to compete with a ghost. I sank into the chair across from his desk, the last of my fight draining out of me. I didn't mean what I said, David. I whispered. It was a mistake. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then why? He asked, his voice a quiet, lethal weapon. Does it feel like the truest thing you've said to me in years? He turned back to his laptop, a clear, unequivocal dismissal. I sat there for a long, silent moment, a stranger in my husband's office, a ghost in my own home. I had come in seeking a fight, a confrontation, a connection of any kind. I left with a chilling, terrible clarity. This was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. And David was not just the judge and the jury. He was the executioner. And he had been planning this for a very, very long time. The night was a long, sleepless descent into a new kind of hell. The house was a tomb, David a silent, spectral presence in his locked office, and my own mind a relentless, tormenting chorus of his words. This is me taking control, the phrase echoed, a chilling testament to the fact that I was not just losing a marriage. I was a pawn in a game whose rules I didn't understand. The dawning realization that this was not a spontaneous, emotional reaction on David's part, but a cold, calculated, long-planned maneuver, was terrifying. He hadn't just been unhappy. He had been gathering evidence, building a case, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My stupid, careless comment had not been the cause. It had simply been the pretext. I needed to understand. I needed to know the true shape of the battlefield I was on. And there was only one person who held a piece of the map. The decision to call Alex again was a reckless one, I knew. He was a complication, a variable in an already volatile equation. But he was also my only source of intelligence. He picked up on the first ring, his voice laced with an immediate, and perhaps not entirely genuine, concern. Emma, are you okay? No. I said, my own voice a raw, ragged thing. Can I come over? At his apartment, a space that was the very antithesis of my own meticulously ordered home, warm, cluttered, and filled with the scent of coffee and old books. The story of my latest confrontation with David spilled out of me. He thinks I'm in love with you, I said, the words feeling absurd and dangerous on my tongue. He thinks I've been comparing him to you for years. Alex listened, his expression a careful, unreadable mask. When I was done, he sighed, a long, weary sound. I was afraid of this, he said. What do you mean? He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. David and I, our relationship has always been complicated. He's always seen me as a rival. For our parents' attention, for success, for everything. But that's not your fault, I insisted. No, he agreed. But it's his reality. He's a man who needs to be in control. And he's a man who holds a grudge. He sees me as the one thing in his life he can't manage, can't predict. And when you and I became friends, when he saw that we had a connection, I think it became a part of his larger narrative of being the one who is constantly being undermined by me. The pieces began to fall into a new, more sinister configuration. David's coldness, his distance, his obsession with control, it wasn't just about our marriage. It was about a much older, deeper wound. A wound that Alex had, wittingly or unwittingly, kept open. Do you think he's doing this to punish me? I asked, my voice a whisper. Or to punish you? I don't know, Emma. Alex said, his voice grim. With David, it's probably both. If he feels like he's losing, he will burn the entire board to the ground just to make sure no one else can win. His words sent a shiver of pure, cold dread down my spine. I was not just in a failing marriage. I was a casualty in a lifelong war between two brothers, a war I had never even known was being waged. As we talked, as Alex filled in the gaps of their shared, toxic history, the parental favoritism, the sibling rivalry, the years of quiet, simmering resentment, a new, terrible clarity began to emerge. I had been a fool. I had been so consumed by my own unhappiness that I had failed to see the much larger, more complex game that was being played around me. I left his apartment with a sense of dread that was even more profound than before. I had come seeking answers, and I had found them. But the answers were more terrifying than the questions. David was not just a heartbroken husband lashing out in pain. He was a master strategist, a man who had been planning this endgame for years. And I, and his brother, were just pieces on his board. When I returned to the house, it was with the chilling realization that I was not just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my very survival, against a man whose capacity for cold, calculated cruelty I was only just beginning to understand. The morning after my conversation with Alex was the morning of my own personal revolution. I woke up in the cold, silent guest room of my own house, and for the first time, the fog of my grief and confusion began to lift, replaced by a cold, clear, and utterly unfamiliar rage. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't even know was being played, a casualty in a war that had nothing to do with me. David's resentment, his years of quiet, simmering animosity towards his brother, his own profound and untreated insecurities. He had used our marriage as the battlefield for his own personal demons. And I was done. I would not be a victim. I would not be a pawn. If he wanted a war, I would give him one. But I would fight it on my own terms. My first act of rebellion was to call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best, most notoriously ruthless divorce attorney in the city. Her name was Melissa Stone, and her reputation preceded her. She was a shark, a killer, a woman who did not believe in compromise. I sat in her sleek, minimalist office, a space that was as cold and intimidating as her reputation, and I laid out the entire, sordid story. The divorce papers. David's cold, calculated cruelty. Alex's role in their lifelong psychodrama. I did not cry. I did not equivocate. I presented the facts. Melissa listened, her expression a mask of professional neutrality. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. This is a solid agreement he's presented, she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. Very thorough. Your husband is a planner. So what do? I asked. You fight back, she said. We don't just contest this. We go on the offensive. But first, I need to know, do you want to save this marriage? Or do you want to win this war? The question was a stark, brutal, and deeply liberating one. Did I want to save my marriage? To the man who had been silently plotting its demise for years? To the man who had used my own emotional vulnerability as a weapon against me? I want to win, I said, the words tasting like a new and unfamiliar kind of freedom. The next few days were a blur of strategic planning. I became a different person. The weeping, pleading, desperate woman was gone, replaced by a cold, focused, and utterly determined soldier. Melissa helped me draft a counterproposal to David's divorce filing, one that was not just a defense, but an attack. We documented his emotional neglect, his financial control, his history of using his work as a means of avoidance and punishment. I began to reclaim my own life, piece by painful piece. I reactivated my old professional network, reaching out to colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. I started looking for a job, for a way to secure my own financial independence. I opened my own bank account, Each small act of autonomy was a victory, a reclamation of the self I had allowed to be subsumed by his. David, of course, noticed the shift. The weeping, helpless wife had been replaced by a quiet, determined, and increasingly absent one. "Where were you today?" he would ask, his tone a mixture of suspicion and a new, unfamiliar uncertainty. "Out," I would reply, my voice a cool, even tone, offering no further explanation. His attempts to control the narrative, to maintain his position of power, began to fail. He was used to my emotional reactions, my tears, my pleas. My cold, strategic calm unnerved him. One evening, I sat down and made a list. Not of what I had lost, but of what I wanted. Independence, respect, happiness. The words on the page were a manifesto, a declaration of my own personal independence. And as I looked at them, I realized that none of them, not a single one, depended on David. The war was far from over. I knew he would fight, and he would fight dirty. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer afraid. I was not just a character in his story anymore. I was the author of my own, and I was just beginning to write the next chapter. The quiet, cold war in our home escalated, a chess match played with silent glances and a shared, suffocating tension. While I was building my own war chest, my own strategy for survival, Alex was waging a campaign of his own, a subtle, insidious offensive of emotional support that was beginning to feel less like kindness and more like a siege. His calls became more frequent, his texts more intimate. He positioned himself as my sole ally in a hostile world, the one person who truly understood the depths of David's cold, calculating nature. "How are you holding up?" he would ask, his voice a warm, conspiratorial murmur. "You're so strong, Emma. Stronger than you know." His words were a balm on my frayed, raw nerves. But they were also a poison. He was feeding me a narrative in which he was the hero, the savior, the man who saw the true, brilliant, and unappreciated woman that I was. And I, in my vulnerable, wounded state, was beginning to believe him. The line was crossed one evening, after another day of tense, silent warfare with David. Alex called, his voice laced with a new, more urgent, concern. "You deserve so much better than this, Emma," he said, his voice a low, intense whisper. "David, he doesn't appreciate you. He never has. But I do. I always have." The words were a detonation. "Alex," I said, my own voice a shaky, warning tone, "don't." "Why not?" he pressed. "Why can't I say what we both know is true? There's always been something between us, Emma. A connection. You feel it too, don't you?" "No," I said, the word a lie, but a necessary one. "You're his brother, Alex. This is wrong." "What's wrong?" he shot back, his voice hardening. "Is watching you waste your life with a man who treats you like a line item on a balance sheet. You're miserable with him. Why are you still fighting for a marriage that's already dead?" I ended the call, my hand trembling, my heart a frantic, trapped bird. His words were a toxic, seductive cocktail of truth and manipulation. Was he right? Was our marriage already dead? Had he been waiting, all this time, for it to finally die so he could swoop in and claim the spoils? The next evening, David broke his silence. He cornered me in the kitchen, his eyes as cold and sharp as shards of ice. "You've been talking to him," he said. It was not a question. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my own defenses rising. "Don't play dumb, Emma," he snapped. "Alex, he's been circling, hasn't he? Playing the part of the concerned, supportive friend. But you don't know him like I do. He's not your friend, Emma. He's a vulture." "That's not true," I insisted, though a part of me, a cold, terrified part, knew it was. "Isn't it?" he said, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. "He doesn't care about you, Emma. He cares about winning. He has spent his entire life trying to take what is mine. And you are just the latest prize in his pathetic, lifelong competition with me. And if you let him, he will use you, and he will destroy you, and he will feel absolutely nothing." His words, his raw, undisguised, and deeply wounded honesty, were a bucket of ice water to the face. For the first time, I saw the war between these two brothers not as a backdrop to my own drama, but as the central, tragic plot. And I had been a willing, if unwitting, pawn. That night, I lay awake and I saw it all with a new, terrible clarity. I was trapped between two men, two brothers, each of them using me for their own purposes. David, to punish a brother he had always resented. Alex, to conquer a territory he had always coveted. And I, in my loneliness and my desperation, had allowed myself to become the battlefield. The morning after my twin epiphanies, David's calculated cruelty and Alex's predatory kindness, was the morning I finally, irrevocably, chose myself. The house was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the unspoken, toxic history of two brothers and the woman who had become the fulcrum of their lifelong war. I could not breathe in that house anymore. It was time to end it. All of it. I waited until David was in the kitchen, his morning ritual of coffee and financial news a testament to his unshakable, infuriating composure. "We need to talk," I said, my voice not the shaky, pleading whisper of the woman I had been, but the calm, steady, and unfamiliar voice of the woman I was becoming. He looked up, an eyebrow raised in mild, condescending surprise. "I'm done, David," I said. "With this. With you. With your brother. With this entire, pathetic, and exhausting game." A flicker of something, surprise, disappointment, crossed his features, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "All right," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's talk. This isn't about what I said." I began, the words a calm, measured indictment. "This is about you. This is about your years of resentment, your inability to communicate, your need to control everything and everyone around you. You didn't just let our marriage die, David. You actively, systemically suffocated it." He stared at me, his mask of composure beginning to crack. "You've been holding on to your anger at your brother, at the world, at me, for so long that you've let it poison everything." I continued, the words a torrent of long-suppressed truth. "You're right. Our marriage is broken. But you are just as responsible for breaking it as I am. Don't you dare lay this all at my feet." Before he could respond, a knock at the door. I didn't need to guess. It was Alex. David's jaw tightened. "Perfect timing," he muttered. He opened the door, and there was Alex, his handsome face a mask of practiced, earnest concern. "What's going on?" he asked, his gaze flicking between us. "Come in, Alex," David said, his voice dripping with a cold, sarcastic venom. "Emma and I were just talking about you. Your timing, as always, is impeccable." The two brothers faced each other in my living room, two sides of the same toxic coin. "You've been circling my wife like a vulture, haven't you?" David snarled. "Waiting for your moment. Well, here it is. Take her. She's all yours." "David, stop," I cried, but they were no longer listening to me. They were locked in their own, private, lifelong battle. "You don't know what you're talking about," Alex shot back. "Don't I?" David sneered. "You've always wanted what was mine. Well, congratulations. You can have her." And then, I found my voice. A new voice. A strong voice. A voice that was entirely my own. "I am not a prize," I said, the words cutting through their childish, pathetic posturing. They both turned to look at me, stunned into silence. "I am not a territory to be conquered," I continued, my voice rising, filled with a power I did not know I possessed. "I am not a weapon for you to use against each other. I am a person, and I am done with both of you." I turned to Alex. "You are not my friend. You are not my savior. You are a man who preys on vulnerability, and I am no longer vulnerable." I turned to David. "And you? You are a man so consumed by his own wounded pride that you would rather burn your entire world to the ground than admit that you are in pain. You have not just lost a wife, David. You have lost yourself." Neither of them spoke. They simply stared at me, two broken, pathetic men, finally seeing me, perhaps for the first time, not as a wife or a sister-in-law or a prize, but as a woman who was reclaiming her own life. I walked to the door, grabbing my purse on the way. "I am done," I said, my voice clear and steady. "With this house, with this marriage, with this entire, toxic, and soul-crushing psychodrama." I walked out of that house and into the bright, clean, and terrifying sunlight of a new day. I did not know where I was going. I did not know what would happen next. But for the first time in a very long time, I was free, and I was not looking back.